Right.
Yeah.
You know why I asked all those questions? Because we have the commissioner from the African Union in charge of trade and industry. And all the questions that you've had for I don't know how long will be answered today by the commissioner. So we have an app. I think in a minute it's going to go up. Slido, you'll go on, send in your questions as we will be asking those questions. The reason we're doing that is we're trying to go away from spending a lot of time. So I'll be asking the questions on your behalf. But as we start, this was more of a dream, but we're seeing it now fruitioning, coming into reality. And it took time for Africa to bring up something like the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is the largest free trade area in the world. My name is Mugisha. I'm a senior producer, news anchor with CNBC Africa. That is the largest news business channel in Africa, period. Yeah, we're not in contest with anyone. And Dr. Albert, I just want us to start from some of the basics. We're looking at $50 to $70 billion to be, generated by this free trade area. Of course, moving into the 2040s, but of course, looking at a speed of a 52% growth on intra-African trade, at least by 2024. You recently said that Africa will no longer hold a begging bowl, but looking at creating our own future with this trade. And that is quite a firm belief and, positivity around the trade area. But I want you to, again, at the same time, because we are in America, not at home, I want you to give this same message to investors who are seated in here today. What don't they already know? Not from a politician perspective, but more from a business perspective. Why should they be looking at the AfCFTA? Why should they be investing with Africa, doing trade with Africa? And how does that stand to benefit them as businesses? You may take it away.
Well, there are a number of factors. The first one is the demographic factor. If you look around the world today, Africa has the youngest population in the world. Then the other factor, which is also equally of a demographic nature, is that the middle class is growing fastest in the emerging economies. Not many years ago, 60% of private consumption was in the developed world. As we speak right now, it's 50%, 50%. 50% of private consumption is in the developed world, and 50% of private consumption is in the emerging world, which is Africa is part of it. So there's going to be growing private consumption in Africa. And for perceptive business, that is a huge opportunity. Because it means that if you produce in that market, the commodities or the products are going to be bought immediately. And the bottom line will go up. So as a result of that, what Africa needs right now are investments. Investments, not aid.
Congratulations on reaching, of course, the number of signatories that you needed to kick off this market. But signing is one thing, and enactment is a totally different thing. And we want to see how much political willingness are we looking at from the African heads of states or their governments to ratify the AfCFTA so we can see it start to work and also do away with the non-tariff barriers. Because I was speaking to business people from Kigali. I was there when it was signed. And one of the biggest questions were, we are looking at a case here of you have goods coming from Tanzania through to Kigali or to the Democratic Republic of Congo. You will be taxed at each and every border you go to, entering a country. And that was very big for the businesses now even more big for small and medium enterprises, which are growing on the continent, providing about 70% of the jobs that are currently on the continent. How do you see this, or how fast should we expect that to be done away with?
I think it's going to be very, very fast. Let me go back to Kigali. The day before the agreement was going to be signed, we worked in the room as a team. We went to each and every member state to find out how many countries were going to sign. And when the books or the agreement was opening for signature, we were sure that only 28 countries were going to sign. But the trick we did was also to publicize the signing ceremony. And some of the heads of state and government were able to see the evolution of the signing ceremony, and they were in Kigali. So they gave instructions to their heads of delegations. You go and sign. So we had a record for 4 countries signing in Kigali itself. And 3 months later, another 5 countries signed. And then by February this year, another 52 countries signed. And when in Niamey, 2 more countries signed, which brings it to 54. This shows the strong political will that the heads of state and government attach. And then come to ratifications. I stated in my speech that we were advised by the legal counsel that it takes about 5 years for the agreement to enter into force. We did it in slightly over a year, which is unprecedented. Again, it shows the commitment that is there. When we went to the operational phase, launch of the operational phase, all the 55 African Union member states were there. None of them was absent. And they readily stated that by 1st July, they are going to be ready to start trading. So there's that strong political will. And there's also a realization that the history of fragmentation that we have gone through since independence has economically not served Africa well. Let's seize the new opportunities offered by a larger market. And that commitment is there from all the heads of state and government.
At the extraordinary summit that happened in Kigali again, most of the business people or from the private sector had, this kind of saying that we hope that we get to understand exactly what we are to benefit from the AfCFTA. And that brought me to, questioning, was there enough consultation from the private sector? Because, well, they are the ones to run the trade after all. So did the African Union do enough consultation before bringing up the AfCFTA? We did.
Because as a result of the Kigali summit, the private sector decided to organize itself at 2 levels. The first level was to establish the Afro Champions Initiative or club. And they requested to have a memorandum of understanding with us. And we quickly facilitated. I signed it on behalf of the Commission. So we have a working arrangement with the Afro Champions. And in order to demonstrate appreciation for the good work, in Kigali, in March last year, the Afro Champions pledged $1 million to facilitate advocates for the ratification of the agreement. And they fulfilled that pledge. They gave us that amount of money. It's not always that we find such commitments from the African private sector. Then we also decided to relaunch the Pan-African Private Sector Trade and Investment Committee, which was dormant some time back, because they saw a huge opportunity for them to participate in the trade policy negotiations, formulation, and implementation. And the ministers allowed them to be attending future meetings. So the private sector is being fully involved. The miners decided on their own to create a Pan-African Chamber of Mines, which is working now on a memorandum of understanding with us. They saw the opportunity. The accountants and auditors requested me to go and address them in Cape Town early this year, and I encouraged them to come up with a memorandum of understanding so that we can have such a cooperative framework. They're working on that. So the private sector is fully involved. And at a national level, there's a decision of the summit that we should have African Continental Free Trade Area national committees. And part of the membership to those committees should be the private sector. They are fully involved. So we are working very, very closely with them. And there is also an already existing institution, the Pan-African Chambers of Commerce and Industry, whose headquarters is in Addis Ababa. They have been participating in all the negotiations. So the private sector is fully involved.
Earlier on, you talked about market access, and I want to bring it back, but also with consultation in question. You brought forward the dates for negotiation, and of course to do with the tariff schedules. Mm-hmm. Why was that?
Bringing forward the dates for I don't know what you mean by that.
The negotiations for the tariff schedules, they were brought forward, and you were part of the movement. So why was that brought forward? Well,
the thing is that we wanted to ensure early start of trading. Mm-hmm. You see, when the agreement entered into force, if you stall the process, then the momentum goes down. And when the momentum goes down, new problems can emerge. So to ensure that we maintain the commitment to deliver on time and in full, then we say we must commit ourselves to doing a very good job. And in order to, as aid member states, we've come up with an application where each member state can upload their tariff offers online, and their password is protected. So this makes it much easier to reach out to all the member states, and they can be communicating. So with that, then it will be possible to come to some understanding. Basically, in negotiations of this nature, it's always who is going to move first. A lot of countries have already prepared their tariff schedules, but they don't want to be the first ones to upload them to the rest of the membership. Right. And that's why we said, let's come up with a password protected. And that is encouraging a lot of them to upload.
And Ambassador Muchanga, from where you stand, do you think this has left the member states with enough time to do consultations with their own private sector?
It has given a lot of them. Throughout the negotiation, we have said, each time there's a decision, bring it to the private sector. And some of the countries have done that. I think Nigeria is one of the countries which undertook a very broad-based consultative process. They consulted the private sector, they consulted the civil society, they consulted the regional governors and everybody. So other member states have been undertaking those consultations. The key issue is that this is a major change program. And in any change situation, there is always resistance to change because you don't know what tomorrow brings. There's always fear of the unknown. That's the first element. The second element is that some businesses have grown as monopolies in several African countries. Now, all of a sudden, they are required to compete, and the monopolies are supposed to end, which means that they're going to lose a very attractive profit center. They'll come up with the ways and means of ensuring that this is not done. And we are aware of those mindsets, and we are discussing with the businesses concerned to say, see a big picture of really contributing to the growth of Africa by opening up and engaging in the competition and innovation.
For, the intra-African trade, of course, to fruition, we're looking at some of the things that could be done, and there is diversification of products, exports, and of course, product sophistication. But what measures are in place to ensure that African countries can do that? Because if you look back maybe between 2011 to 2017, only about 3 countries, that is Senegal, Rwanda, I'm trying to remember the other country, have been able to diversify their exports. Do you see a way this could be done?
Well, key to this is the development of regional and continental value chains, which are also linked to global value chains. A number of producers around the world are going to come up with the global value chain factories in Africa because of the opportunity that is there. A large market and a growing middle class. Now, the process of diversification started in quite a number of countries because of a limited market. And some of it was based on import substitution. And immediately there was a shortage of foreign exchange. The process of deindustrialization set in. So there are a number of factors that led to that. But through the development of continental and regional value chains, each country will have something to participate in as far as manufacturing is concerned. Let's take the example of the motor industry. There's an expert here. There are so many components in a motor vehicle. You need electrical wiring, you need the car seats, and you need other components, including tires. They can be produced in several parts of Africa. Then you assemble them in the final part. Airbus is using that model. So there's no reason why we cannot use it in Africa. If you go to East Africa, one of the apparels of huge demand is the West African fashion wear. If you develop for the fashion industry, there's no need why we cannot develop the fashion industry on that basis. And when you look at global level, there's emerging demand for African fashion. Not too long ago, I was talking to one of the Africans based in London. She was telling me that she came across a textile, ladies' apparel, with African fabrics. And it was in one of the upper market retail shops in London. It was going for £2,500. So the opportunity is there. It's for each and every country to say, here's a market that has been offered. Where do we have comparative advantage? And how do we make use of the opportunity?
Right. As we talk about the African continental free trade area, I want us to look back at the boosting intra-African trade action plan. What do we learn from this? Because we see it as also another framework that looks at, dealing with the constraints that our, traders face on the continent today. As the African Union, what are some of the key areas that you think you pick from the BIAT into the AFCFTA, and how can this bring about a different narrative? The AFCFTA, how different is it?
Well, the action plan on boosting intra-African trade, BIAT as we call it, has 7 clusters, one of which is trade policy, trade facilitation, productive capacities, trade-related infrastructure, trade information, trade finance, and factor market integration. Trade policy, we've delivered. We've created the African Continental Free Trade Area. Now the next stage is to come up with a Pan-African trade policy, which will be anchored on a common external tariff. That's work for the future. We are going to move towards the creation of an African Customs Union. That's work for the future. Trade facilitation. The work, there is an annex in the protocol on trade in goods, which is specifically anchored on trade facilitation, and it's also anchored on the African level implementation of the WTO trade facilitation agreement. So we have implemented that. Productive forces. We're talking of the development of regional value chains across Africa, engagement of manufacturers across Africa. We are delivering on that one. Trade-related information indicated that the Afro champions have come up with a framework for increasing investments in trade-related infrastructure. We are delivering. Trade finance. That one is still a slight challenge, but the managing director is here. We're not going to immediately meet the annual financing gap of about $120 billion in trade finance that we are having. But between now and 2025, the African Export-Import Bank has made enough money to ensure that we meet that target. So there could still be some challenges. Trade information we have delivered at several levels. I talked of the web-based mobile application on the African Continental Free Trade Area. I talked of the Intra-African Trade Fair. And we're also creating an institution we are going to call the African Trade Observatory, which is going to give information on a wide range of issues related to the development of intra-African trade, including opportunities available for imports and exports within the African market, including their prices. The issue of market integration, factor market integration, there are two key elements there. The first one is free movement of people. There is already a protocol on the free movement of people, which is undergoing a process of signing and ratifications. So far, it has about 32 signatories and 2 ratifications. We need a minimum of 15 ratifications. Then capital market integration. With the development of a Pan-African payments and settlement platform, work is beginning to come up with a framework for facilitating capital market integration. So we are fully implementing the action plan on boosting intra-African trade.
Dr. Muchanga, you mentioned something earlier on about specialization, and I like that we're here tonight in a room full of experts. I had a conversation with Mr. Hightower there. He specializes in automotive industry, right? When you look at the African continent, you definitely see that there are some regions that are dealing with a number of industries, right? Do you see a time where Africa, as trade grows, as intra-African trade grows, and of course looking to the liberalization and becoming a one body, a time where a country will specialize in a particular sector, per se, Nigeria with the oil industry, or South Africa with the automotive industry? Do you see this happening?
Well, I think the oil industry, if you talk of processing, yes, not the export of commodities. We're trying to move all African countries away from dependence on commodities. Because I think more or less it's becoming very, very difficult to anchor your development on a commodity dependence. Demand is faltering most of the time. So there is an element of value addition at every stage. For example, when we liberalize trade throughout Africa, and we reach the final level of 100%, it means that if you export commodities to the rest of Africa, you're getting very, very little. It only makes sense if you do some value addition. Right now, work is underway at our level, the African Union, to come up with a mapping exercise on the development of value chains across Africa. When that mapping exercise is completed, we'll be able to have a complete picture of the potentials in each of the African countries, the 55 African countries. That is the first level. Then the second level is that we are going to use that mapping exercise to come up with the sector investment profiles, such that when an investor wants to participate in a certain sector, all they need is to come to us and we give them the information, and they can then start doing the work without having to come up with a very detailed feasibility study.
Only if this was up to me, I would have this conversation go on until tomorrow, but unfortunately it isn't. So I would like to go on and read out some of the questions. Mm-hmm. You are a superstar panelist. No problem. So many questions I see here, but I'll start from those that came in early as 10:33 a.m.
Okay.
Etiel asked a question. How is the AfCFTA going to deal with the sovereignty concerns, especially for small economies in Africa? I would also love to hear from you, because I'm from Rwanda, which is a rather smaller economy, emerging, but relatively small if you look at the other economies on the continent. So how does the AfCFTA plan to deal with the sovereignty concerns?
Well, the first issue is that by coming together, it means you are surrendering national sovereignty and pulling continental sovereignty. So by signing this agreement, countries have affirmed to themselves and the rest of the world that they are ready to pull continental sovereignty. That is the first issue. The second issue is that countries like Rwanda, what's the population of Rwanda?
We're looking at 12 million people.
12 million. All of a sudden, it has a market of 1.2 billion people.
Right.
So if a product is produced in Rwanda, it does not have to just forecast for that population of 12 million. It has to look at a big picture. And the history of regional integration is that it's actually the small countries that benefit most. You look at the EU, Ireland, Estonia, because of the smallness, when they export to the rest of the European Union, the best benefit most. Similarly, during NAFTA, you look at the three countries, Canada, US, and Mexico. It was Canada and Mexico which are benefiting most because they are able to exploit larger economies of scale. So there's no fear about sovereignty.
Right. And Komi also asked you to explain how your team is planning to implement the rules of origin to avoid the dumping of cheap foreign goods into the African market.
That is what keeps me awake at night.
Interesting.
That's
thank you for the question.
That keeps me awake at night. And get it that the element is trade deflection. It's very, very, very difficult to monitor. The only long-term solution is that we need to move very fast towards an African customs union and a common market so that we have complete harmonization of tariff levels with third parties and also domestic regulations. When you do that, you have removed the problem permanently. But we are going to come up with a very elaborate monitoring framework, because under the agreement, we are expected to come up with an annual report to the ministers of trade indicating how we are implementing the agreement. So the issue of dumping or trade deflection is going to be closely monitored to see how we can resolve it. And if we see it as a growing phenomenon, then we'll tell the member states that let's not waste time. Let's move fast towards a customs union and internal market. And the foundations are already there. We've got the single African air transport market. We've got the protocol on free movement of people. And we're going to finalize negotiations on the protocol on investment, which will create a common investment area, the protocol on the competition policy, and the protocol on the intellectual property rights. All those are foundations of a common market. So just really getting the political will from member states to say, let's go towards a common external tariff and an internal market, then the problem will be resolved. But it's a real challenge.
All right. Ambassador Muchanga, we can't talk about trade if we cannot talk about infrastructure development. And this has to do with hard infrastructure and soft infrastructure. You know, a gentleman or a lady, because it's anonymous in this room, had a question in regards to that. Like, cross-border road transport plays a key role in Africa, carrying over 80% of goods. To what extent is the FCFTA going to address transport challenges in Africa? I want you to be to be spot on this, and not only road transport, because still we're looking at air transport, which has grown tremendously on the African continent, but infrastructure is still an issue.
Yes.
How is the team at the African Union, of course in charge of the AFCFTA, looking to deal with this? Well,
I think the starting point is that, yes, the infrastructure landscape in Africa is quite fragile. We need to develop it. But the African Export-Import Bank is here. They've assured me that the current stock of infrastructure we have in Africa is capable of generating intra-African trade of about $1 trillion US. But that does not mean that we do not need to develop it. We need to develop it very rapidly. When you create a market of this nature, you excite a lot of people. Not too long ago, I had a company from South Africa, which has teamed up with a German company to develop an Africa-wide rail transport network. And I encourage them to join the Afro Champions Club, and they've done that. Then the Afro Champions Club came up with a financing framework which assured the heads of state and government in Niamey that within 10 years, we're going to end the infrastructure financing gap across Africa. Like you indicated, infrastructure is wide-ranging. The issue of energy is part of the question of infrastructure. The
communication too.
Yes, I'll come to that. The Afro Champions have looked at how we can make use of the Inga Dam. Already 15 African countries have mobilized to assure that they will be able to make use of the electricity that is generated from Inga Dam. And we're at advanced stages of trying to see if we can conclude a financing agreement around that. The issue of transport, we have got the single African air transport market. Nothing stops an African to join forces with the foreign partners to come up with the low-budget airlines across Africa. Now it's in the hands of the private sector. It's no longer in the hands of the government. So we're looking at all aspects of infrastructure, and I can say that I think with the establishment of the African Continental Free Trade Area, there are better prospects for ensuring that we move on a program of rapid infrastructure development.
With just about 14 minutes to the top of the hour, I want you to now come back to something to do with markets, of course, to do with the AGOA, which expires in 2025. Now, this is a question which I believe is from someone from here in the United States, probably an American business. They asked that, how will the AFCFTA play a role with trade relations with the United States, with the AGOA expiring in 2025?
Well, from here, I'm proceeding straight to Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire, for the 18th edition of AGOA. And those are some of the issues that are going to come up in the picture. One of the key challenges from the African side is that AGOA is there, but a lot of African countries have not mobilized enough investments to produce products that could be sold in all the 50 states of the United States of America, and hence the high level of underutilization. So the African Continental Free Trade Area provides an opportunity to really scale up investments so that companies can trade both within Africa and to the United States of America. So that is going to be an opportunity. The third element is that AGOA is a unilateral program developed by the U.S. administration. It's not a negotiated instrument between Africa and the United States of America. So when now it comes to the end, the U.S. administration and the Congress will see to how to move to the next level. But from the African side, we have already communicated to the U.S. administration that our long-term interest to see if we can have a free trade agreement between Africa under the African Continental Free Trade Area and the United States of America. But that is just a suggestion where there's no agreement. The U.S. administration has other positions, but it's a matter under discussion. We have not yet come to a conclusive position. And let me indicate that a forum like this can be very useful in ensuring that we sensitize Africans on the opportunities available to make better use of the AGOA preference scheme.
There's a very interesting concern in the room that there has been, we've seen trade blocks fail, and the question is, are there some lessons learned from failed existing regional trade agreements in order to avoid the same challenges? And the example was the ECOWAS market. Have you done a study around some of the trade blocks that have been set up but are not functioning?
Well, I don't know how you say ECOWAS is not functioning, because ECOWAS is a customs union. And not too long ago, ECOWAS announced that they are going to have the ECO, the single currency, by 2020. So when you say ECOWAS has failed, it's very, very difficult to say I agree with you. But the fundamental issue is that when we came up with the Abuja Treaty in 1991, we designated the regional economic communities as building blocks. Now, the agenda for continental integration has come up. So the first stage is to create the continental framework, which we have done. Then when we move to the level of the African Customs Union, that's when the question of what to do with each of the regional economic communities is going to come up. And we're going to have a very detailed technical study on how to ensure that we align the programs of regional economic communities and the institutions within the African Customs Union that we're going to create. Because why that is so is because when we create the African Customs Union, we are going to have a common African external tariff. And it will be more or less monitored at the continental level, not at the regional level.
I want to just add a little bit of my thought on this question. Again, in another question that is exactly the same. I was speaking to Abdul Rabi Usamad, a Nigerian billionaire who deals with sugar and cement. And he mentioned something very interesting. It's very hard for them to do business with the Benin Republic, which is basically a neighboring country. Nigerians and the Benin, the trade is very hard. And they belong to the same trade bloc. On the other hand, East Africa is one of the emerging markets and fastest growing regional trade bloc. I think it was in March, we all learned of what happened with the closing of the borders, and you see trading stop coming to a halt, right? With such happening, and we're looking at coming together as a continent to do trade together, how does this hurt the ongoing process with the AFCFTA? How does it stand to hinder development on the continent?
Well, non-tariff barriers a major impediment to development of intra-regional trade. And the nature of non-tariff barriers is that they are always more or less living devils, if I can use that term. You try to eliminate one non-tariff barrier today, another one will emerge in another form the next day. And this is worldwide. Even within the European Union, you find those challenges. What we have done is to come up with an online non-tariff barriers monitoring, reporting, and elimination mechanism, such that if a party has been subjected to NTBs, they will immediately report that to the Secretariat of the African Continental Free Trade Area, and they will ensure that they deal with the issue there and then. And if that fails, it goes to dispute settlement. So there will always be a challenge of non-tariff barriers. Governments, or even businesses, come up with various entities. Not too long ago, I was in Zambia. One would-be exporter was complaining to me that he has been trying for the past 3 months to get an export license to export soybeans to Rwanda. And the officials in the Ministry of Agriculture, the person who was supposed to sign, has not signed. I said, well, that's a non-tariff barrier. In the future, all you need is to report it to us, and we'll deal directly with the person involved.
Interesting. So you heard. If you find a problem like that one, please report to the AU.
Yes.
To the AU. Quick one though. I think I'll take two because time is upon us. China has been involved with Africa at a very interesting level financially. We're seeing a lot of infrastructure development projects coming up in Africa. As of recently, we saw the Djibouti Free Trade Zone coming up. And an interesting question from IBEC. What role does China play in all of this, since they have been heavily involved in most African countries in the recent years? I will also add my own question to that. What do we do if we find ourselves debt trapped?
How many of us read the Economist magazine for this week?
By show of hands.
By show of hands.
How many of you have read the Economist magazine
For this week?
For this week.
Yes. Not all of it. But did you see the caption on the evolving relationship between China and Russia? And you read it? Yes. What it tells you is actually what you're talking about. Russia is not just involved in Africa. It's all over the world. The issues that you're talking about to Africa, they are also experienced in Russia. They are also involved in the Bid and Road Initiative, BRI. But they've assured us in their engagements that it's supposed to be an arrangement of mutual gain. And they say not supposed, it's an arrangement of mutual gain. And quite a number of African countries have clearly stated that we need longer-term maturities so that Africans don't go into a debt trap. When we went to China not too long ago, those concerns were raised. So the key issue is that it's the fate of each and every African countries, each and every country, to really study its debt profile. Am I be able to repay these loans that I'm getting? If the question is no, then we should not get them. All right. Yes, so let's not just blame the lender. We should also look at ourselves. Yes, we should look at ourselves. Don't borrow recklessly. Scrutinize. Study. Yes.
All right. I would like to thank Dr. Ambassador Albert Muchanga for the wonderful knowledge that he's shared with us about the AFCFTA. I hope that as the Trade with Africa Summit goes on, we are able to learn, communicate, network, and do business together. The last one, however, was if the AFCFTA has a plan for African Americans or Africans that live in America to deal with Africa, to do business with Africa. That's the last one. If there is a plan, please let us know. And that'll be the last one. Thank you so much.
Okay, before I answer that question, let me indicate that in my work, I've received a lot of titles. Sometimes I'm called chief. Sometimes I'm called professor. Sometimes I'm called the doctor like you did. And it's none of the above. But I earned the title of ambassador because in our system, you're an ambassador for life. I served as a professional ambassador. I'm an ambassador for life. But thank you for the honorary title of a doctor. The Afro-Americans were very excited when the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement came into force. And I think one of them, the senior Afro-Americans, I think it's Al Sharpton, made a statement that we should raise dollar for dollar in support of the African Continental Free Trade Area. That is the first point. The second point is that 17 of them came to Niamey, in addition to those, including those from the Caribbean. Then the third element is that they would like to have a continuous program of engagement with the Department of Trade and Industry of the African Union. I'm going to visit a number of cities in September, such as the US, Washington DC, not US, Washington DC, Dallas, and Los Angeles, among others, where I'm going to discuss with the Afro-Americans on the opportunities offered by them. And in those discussions, I would like to work together to develop a program of cooperation with them. Some of them really see a lot of opportunities offered by the new market, and they want to participate in it. And they say, if we cannot really invest directly, we can use other parties to invest. So a stakeholder which is very, very interested, and we are accommodating them in our engagements. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Muchanga. A round of applause for the gentleman.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.